The sky above Draxia was ablaze, lighting up the dark like stars fighting for control. Amid the chaos, Commander Elian Varro stood firm, his outline sharp against the explosions. "Secure the area!" Varro called out over the noise. His soldiers, well trained for such battles, moved quickly. Varro watched the field closely, the ground shifting, soldiers ducking for cover, distant enemy scopes glinting. Draxia, with its rich deposits of the valuable mineral Atraxium, had become a dangerous battleground. His command post was simple, a shield of metal panels with maps showing troop positions. The air smelled of electric sparks from shield and laser fires. "Sir, the eastern flank is weak," a young, dirt-smudged officer reported. His uniform was torn from battle. "Move the 5th Battalion to outflank them," Varro replied steadily. The officer nodded and relayed the orders. As the officer worked, Varro took a moment to feel the ground and hear the distant battle sounds, reminders of the high stakes. Draxia was more than a planet. It was their hope for victory in this far-reaching war. Suddenly, an explosion nearby shook the ground. Varro steadied himself and scanned the horizon. A lone figure staggered out of the smoke, his uniform barely recognizable. Varro sensed the soldier's strong will. "Bring him here," he ordered, pointing. 2 soldiers quickly obeyed and disappeared into the smoke. As they brought the soldier closer, Varro prepared for a new challenge, unaware this meeting might change the war's direction. As the mysterious soldier approached, the air thick with the metallic tang of spent ammunition and the bitter taste of fear, Commander Varro observed him closely. Despite his ragged appearance, the man walked with a determined gait, his eyes scanning the surroundings, not just cautious, but calculating. "State your name and rank," Varro demanded as the figure halted before him, the glow from the nearby fires flickering over his scarred face. "Sir, I am Corporal Marek Voss," he replied, his voice gravelly from the dust and smoke. "Assigned to Reconnaissance. We were ambushed. My unit." His sentence trailed off, the weight of loss briefly shadowing his rugged features. Varro nodded, understanding the toll such memories demanded. "Your report, Corporal. What did you see out there?" Voss straightened, his resolve solidifying. "Enemy fortifications are stronger than we anticipated. They've installed new energy barriers, and their patrols are tripled at key points. But, sir, I've spotted a vulnerability." His tone carried a blend of urgency and opportunity. Intrigued, Varro leaned forward, his senses attuned to the potential turning point unfolding through Voss's words. "Go on," he urged. "There's a narrow pass through the eastern sector, barely guarded. It seems they rely too heavily on their barriers. A stealth team could infiltrate." Voss's proposal was precise, his observations sharp. Varro tasted the possibility in the air, a subtle shift like the cool whisper of night that promises relief after a blistering day. "And you believe we can exploit this?" "Yes, sir. With the right team, we can bypass their defenses and dismantle the power source to their barriers," Voss explained, his hand gesturing to a map pulled from his pocket, worn and smeared with dirt but clear enough. Varro's decision crystallized like frost on glass. "Prepare to lead this mission, Voss. You have 6 hours to assemble your team and finalize your plan," he commanded, his gaze locking with Voss's in mutual recognition of the stakes. As Voss saluted sharply and turned to gather his resources, Varro's attention was momentarily caught by the soft crackle of distant fires wrestling with the darkness. The harsh glare of the command screens painted his face in shades of blue and green, reflecting the constant flux of data streaming in, troop movements, supply levels, communication pings that painted a stark picture of the war's demands. He inhaled deeply, the scent of sweat and resolve mingling in the cramped confines of the command post. Each breath tasted of ash and adrenaline, fueling his focus on the battles ahead. Outside, the night was a tapestry of shadow and light, stitched with the echoes of gunfire and the distant cries of men and women holding the line. Varro stood for a moment, allowing the symphony of war to fill his ears, a reminder of what was at risk and what could be gained. With a final, firm nod to himself, he stepped back to his station, ready to steer the course of war once more. Varro watched as the twilight swallowed Corporal Voss's retreating figure, the crunch of gravel underfoot blending with the softer murmurs of the wind. He turned, his shadow stretching long and thin across the dimly lit command center, the glow from numerous displays casting an otherworldly aura. The screens flickered with the constant flow of wartime data, painting his face with silent stories of conflict. Returning to his map-strewn table, Varro traced the outlined paths with a fingertip, his touch gentle as if not to disturb the fragile hope resting on the narrow pass Voss had described. His mind churned like the distant storm clouds that promised rain but delivered only dust. "Sir, you believe in the Corporal's plan?" Lieutenant Harrow's voice cut through Varro's thoughts, his tone soft yet carrying the weight of concern. Without looking up, Varro responded, "It's more than belief, Harrow. It's necessity." He finally raised his eyes, meeting Harrow's gaze. "Prepare the communications relay. I want updates every 10 minutes once they move out." "As you command, sir," Harrow replied, his figure retreating to fulfill the orders. Left alone, Varro felt the solitude of command. The walls of the command post, though invisible, seemed to close in, suffused with the scent of oil and metal, a testament to the unending labor of war. He could taste the impending metallic bitterness of an oncoming assault, his palate recalling the sharp tang of past conflicts. The night deepened, and Varro stepped outside, seeking a moment of clarity. The sky, a canvas of unyielding obsidian, was pierced by the relentless staccato of artillery fire, its flames reflecting like fallen stars captured in the tears of the earth. He felt the vibrations through the soles of his boots, each pulse a somber drumbeat to which the universe seemed to mournfully sway. Gazing upwards, the stars looked on, indifferent spectators to the worldly turmoil. Varro found a bitter solace in their calm, their cold light a mirror to his own hardened resolve. Each star, a silent witness to countless battles fought under their watch, seemed to hold a story not unlike his, a narrative woven with threads of duty and draped in the shroud of sacrifice. The crisp air filled his lungs, the coolness a sharp contrast to the heat that had earlier filled the day. Each breath was a reminder of the stakes, a physical echo of the tension that gripped his heart with icy fingers. Turning back, Varro re-entered the command post. The soft whispers of his footsteps were a counterpoint to the ever-present din of war, a reminder of the quiet strength required to navigate the chaos. He paused by the digital maps, each blinking light a beacon of both hope and despair, a dual reminder of what had been accomplished and the costs incurred. As the night marched on, Varro awaited the first communication from Voss, each minute stretching into eternity. His heart, a stoic sentinel, stood vigilant against the tides of worry threatening to breach his calm exterior. In this quiet hour, beneath the watchful gaze of a million stars, Commander Elian Varro fortified his spirit for the challenges ahead, his resolve tempered in the forge of celestial silence. As the first rays of dawn teased the horizon, painting it a subdued gray, Varro's communicator finally crackled to life. The static whisper of distant transmissions broke the silence, as urgent as the morning's first breath. "Commander, this is Voss. We're in position," came the voice from the other end, barely above a whisper yet clear in the quiet of dawn. Varro leaned closer, his eyes scanning the strategic displays. "Proceed with the infiltration. Remember, silence is your ally." "Understood, sir. Moving now," Voss replied, his voice fading into the crackle of connection. In the dim light, Varro paced before the command table, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the cold metal. Each soft thud was a reminder of the heartbeat of his operation, pulsing unseen yet vital. He stopped by the window, watching as the soft blue of the early morning bled into the landscape, the darkness retreating like a foe in defeat. The scent of damp earth rose, fresh and poignant, mingling with the less pleasant but all too familiar odors of oil and gunpowder. It was a fragrance that spoke of new beginnings, yet underscored by the perpetual threat of destruction. Varro turned as Lieutenant Harrow approached, his footsteps resonant in the otherwise still morning. "Sir, all teams report ready. Awaiting your signal." "Give the order, Harrow." "Let's bring our people home," Varro said, his voice steady, projecting a calm that belied the turbulent anticipation churning within. As Harrow relayed the commands, Varro's gaze drifted back to the digital maps, his mind tracing the paths his soldiers took like a silent guardian watching over unseen wards. The screen's glow cast pale shadows across his face, highlighting the lines of worry that marked his brow. Outside, the dawn chorus began, a cacophony of distant birdsong that seemed incongruous with the crackle of gunfire that occasionally punctuated the air. The juxtaposition of nature's resilience against the backdrop of human conflict painted a bittersweet tableau, a reminder of the world beyond war. Varro sipped his morning coffee, the bitterness on his tongue a sharp contrast to the sweetness of the bird calls. His other senses were assaulted by the soft clatter of keyboards and the whisper of paper as reports came in, each one a thread in the tapestry of their wartime existence. Suddenly the communicator beeped sharply, slicing through the muted sounds of the command center. "Sir, initial breach successful," Harrow announced, turning to face Varro with a look that mirrored the tension they all felt. "Good. Monitor their progress closely. Any change, I want to know immediately," Varro instructed, his voice a low rumble that seemed to resonate with the underlying urgency of their mission. As he spoke, the first true light of day crept through the windows, casting long beams across the room that seemed to chase away the shadows of uncertainty. Varro watched the light play across the floor, its slow but relentless advance a metaphor for their own efforts in this vast, unforgiving theater of war. With every passing minute, the morning grew brighter, illuminating not just the physical space around him, but also shedding light on the possibilities that lay ahead. In this game of shadows and whispers, light was both a literal and figurative ally, and Varro was ready to use it to guide their path to victory. The morning light solidified into a harsh glare as it clawed through the smudged windows of the command center. Commander Varro's eyes remained fixed on the digital displays, the bright pixels recounting the stealth team's silent advance through enemy lines. The tension in the air was palpable, thickening with each forwarded step displayed on the screens. "Sensors pick up increased activity around the target area." Harrow's voice broke the concentrated silence, his words crisp in the charged atmosphere. Varro nodded slightly, his gaze never wavering from the map. "Expect resistance. Make sure Voss is alerted." Harrow tapped commands into his console, the soft clicks blending with the distant sporadic bursts of gunfire that served as a grim background symphony. Varro's nostrils flared at the sharp scent of ozone wafting through the air filters, a reminder of the invisible barriers between his command post and the battlefield. The communicator beeped, a shrill sound that seemed too loud in the tense room. "Voss here. We've hit a snag. The enemy's secondary defenses were not on the original blueprints. Adjusting approach," came the distorted voice, strained but controlled. "Details, Voss," Varro demanded, his voice steel wrapped in velvet, firm yet not overbearing. "There's a newly installed sensor net. Almost walked right into it. We're rerouting, but it'll cost us time," Voss reported, the faint sound of rustling maps and whispered instructions filtering through the connection. "Time we don't have. Find a way around quickly and keep me updated," Varro replied, his fingers drumming an impatient tattoo on the metal table. He turned to face the window, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, its light now a watchful eye over their covert operations. Harrow approached Varro, his presence unassuming yet noticeable. "Sir, should we prepare for a direct assault if the team fails to bypass the new defenses?" Varro considered this, the gears in his mind turning with the precision of a well-oiled machine. "Hold off on that. I want minimal casualties. Let's give Voss a chance to work this out." As Harrow nodded and retreated, Varro's senses were momentarily overwhelmed by the rich, earthy aroma of coffee from a nearby machine, a stark contrast to the sterile adrenaline of the command post. He took a deep breath, tasting the remnants of the morning's bitterness on his tongue, mingled now with a trace of hope. The room fell into a restless quiet, every officer and aide tuned to the frequency of waiting, an arduous task. Varro felt the weight of every second as they stretched into minutes. His eyes briefly closed, letting the world fade into a momentary darkness punctuated only by the distant echoes of war. When he opened them again, the screen showed a new blip moving slowly towards the objective. "Voss's team is moving again," Harrow reported, relief thinly veiling the underlying tension. "Keep monitoring. Any change, I want to be the first to know," Varro commanded, settling back into his chair, the leather creaking under his weight. Outside, the day wore on, indifferent to the human schemes unfolding beneath its vast expanse. Varro's eyes flickered back to the horizon, where the boundary between sky and land blurred, much like the line between victory and defeat. In this lull, the seeds of future battles were germinating, hidden from view but palpable to those who knew where to look. As the day progressed, the light turned harsh, casting stark shadows across the rugged terrain beneath the surveillance drones. Inside the command center, Varro remained fixed on the holographic display, the blip of Voss's team a beacon of tense anticipation. "Terrain's getting rougher, making it hard to stay silent," Voss's voice crackled over the communicator, barely above a whisper. "Use the terrain to your advantage," Varro advised, his tone low and even. "The irregularities can mask your movements if used wisely." Outside, the wind picked up, the howling gusts mirroring the rising tension within the command post. Sand and grit battered against the exterior, a fine dust creeping through the smallest cracks, leaving a thin, abrasive layer on everything it touched. Harrow glanced at Varro, noting the slight clench of his jaw. "Should I alert the air units to stand by?" he asked, his voice a controlled calm. "Not yet. We can't risk any noise. Keep them on alert but grounded," Varro responded, without taking his eyes off the display. The air inside the command center grew stale, the tang of sweat mingling with the lingering sharpness of electronic equipment overheating. The faint scent of overbrewed coffee did little to mask the underlying odors of metal and exertion. Varro's hand moved to the console, adjusting a dial slightly to enhance the audio feed from Voss's team. The soft rustling of their careful movements came through, each step a muted thud against the dry, cracked soil. "Encountering increased resistance. Looks like they're patrolling more heavily than expected," Voss reported, his breathing heavy in the background. "Adjust your route. Move to grid 7. It's less direct but safer," Varro instructed, his finger tracing a new path on the digital map. As Harrow relayed the coordinates, the room filled with the subtle sounds of strategic recalculations, keyboards tapping, murmurs of concise communication, the soft beep of coordinates being confirmed. Varro stood, stretching briefly, the stiffness in his muscles echoing the mental strain. He walked over to the large window, the landscape outside a blur of motion and color as the day began to wane. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful facade belying the deadly game of cat and mouse unfolding under its watch. Turning back to the room, Varro's gaze swept over his team, each member engrossed in their tasks, a symphony of subdued activity directed towards a single goal. He cleared his throat, pulling their attention momentarily. "Stay sharp. Every second counts now," he reminded them, his voice a solid anchor in the fluid uncertainty of warfare. As the light outside dimmed, the screens inside glowed brighter, a vivid reminder of the technology that tethered them to their distant comrades. The digital map pulsed with new data, each update a pulse in the steady heartbeat of the operation. Varro settled back into his command chair, his senses attuned to the evolving situation, ready to adapt at a moment's notice. The quiet hum of the command center was now a backdrop to his focused thoughts, the anticipation of contact from Voss's team a constant thrum in the back of his mind. As night fell, the stakes grew ever higher, each decision sculpting the path to victory or defeat under the indifferent gaze of the stars. Under the cloak of nightfall, the tension in the command center had become palpable, thick as the dust that hung in the air outside. Varro's eyes, usually steady and commanding, flickered with the light of the screens, reflecting the gravity of every moment that passed without word from Voss's team. The silence was abruptly shattered by the sharp crackle of the communicator. "This is Voss. We've bypassed the sensor net, entering the target zone now," came the hushed, urgent whisper. "Copy that, Voss." "Proceed with caution," Varro responded, his voice low. threading through the now hushed room like a steel wire, tense, yet controlled. Outside, the desert's night was alive with sounds, the distant calls of nocturnal creatures and the whispering of the wind sweeping across the sand, a stark contrast to the silent battle being waged under its cover. Inside, the only sounds were the soft clicks of data being entered and analyzed, the occasional shift of personnel moving as quietly as possible, respecting the intensity of the operation unfolding. The smell of cold coffee lingered, forgotten in the heat of focused surveillance, mixing strangely with the sterile scent of technology at work. Varro's hand hovered over the digital map, each movement deliberate, as if by his sheer will he could ensure the mission's success. Visual on the power source, Voss's voice broke through again, this time a whisper so faint it barely stirred the air. Placing charges now. Varro nodded to himself, a silent acknowledgement of the critical phase now underway. Time your actions with the patrol shifts. We can't afford a misstep. Understood. Setting timer for 2 minutes. It should give us just enough window to get clear, Voss replied. The rustle of his movements transmitted through the communicator, suggesting the delicacy of his current actions. In the command center, the mood had shifted to one of barely suppressed anticipation. Every officer and technician seemed to hold their breath, their eyes fixed on their screens, their bodies tensed for action. Varro stepped away from the main console to stand by a viewport, his gaze fixed on the stars scattered across the sky. The beauty of the cosmos stood in mocking contrast to the gritty reality of warfare. He felt the cool glass against his palm, a brief respite from the heat generated by the electronics filling the room. Suddenly, a soft beep signaled success. Charges set. Moving out, Voss reported, his tone a mixture of relief and urgency. Good work. Withdraw to the rendezvous point. We'll cover your exit, Varro commanded, turning from the window to face his team. Harrow was already coordinating the extraction, his voice a calm, efficient flow that directed the support teams to their positions. As they worked, the first hints of dawn began to touch the horizon, the darkness slowly retreating in the face of the approaching light. Varro watched the changing sky, aware that the coming dawn might bring new challenges, but for now, a small victory was within grasp. The uncertainty of what lay ahead lingered in the air, mingling with the dawn's first light, a reminder that in war, nothing was ever certain until it was over. As the first light of dawn spilled across the landscape, transforming the dark into a soft gray, the command center buzzed with a quiet intensity. Varro, standing firm yet alert, watched as the monitors displayed Voss's team making their steady retreat towards safety. The mission's success hung in the balance, palpable in the cool morning air that seeped into the room, mingling with the usual sense of machinery and human determination. Extraction team is in position, Harrow's voice carried across the command center, marked by a precise calm that belied the critical nature of his update. Monitor their exit every step. Any sign of enemy movement, I want to know immediately, Varro instructed, his gaze fixed on the screen where the blips representing Voss's team moved with deliberate speed. Outside, the desert began to awaken. The distant mountains cast long shadows over the valleys, and a gentle breeze stirred up small whirlwinds of sand. The soft hissing sound, a natural counterpart to the quiet clicks and beeps inside the command center. Suddenly, the tranquil morning was shattered by a sharp, urgent alert from one of the monitors. Sir, we have movement on the southern ridge. Looks like an enemy recon team, one of the technicians reported, his voice tight with tension. Varro leaned over the console, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. Divert aerial surveillance to that ridge. Use the drones to give us a visual. I don't want any surprises. As the drones were redirected, the large screen flicked to a live feed, showing the stark and rugged terrain and the small figures moving with stealth. The tension in the room escalated, the air thick with anticipation and the slight tang of electronic heat. Prepare to provide cover if necessary, Varro ordered, turning to Harrow, who was already coordinating with the support teams. The imagery from the drones became clearer, revealing the enemy's cautious advance, their movements a stark contrast to the natural calm of the rising day. The wind outside carried the faint sounds of the distant activity, a reminder of the ever-present danger lurking beyond their secured position. "Voss, you've got company on your 6. Reroute to secondary extraction point," Varro communicated, his voice a firm command that sliced through the mounting apprehension. "Copy that, changing course," came Voss's reply, strained yet controlled, over the sound of rustling gear and soft footsteps. The screen showed Voss's team altering their path, the digital map updating their new route in real time. Varro watched, every muscle tensed, every sense alert to the unfolding drama that was more gripping than any cinematic portrayal. As the team navigated the treacherous terrain, the sun crested the horizon, bathing the command center in a harsh light that seemed to underline the stark reality of their situation. The beauty of the dawn did little to soften the hard lines of worry etched on Varro's face or the anxious looks exchanged among the team. In this crucial moment, every second felt elongated, stretched thin by the weight of expectation and fear. The command center, a hive of whispered commands and silent prayers, waited for the signal that would mean safety or confrontation. The mystery of whether they would succeed in evading the enemy hung in the air, as tangible as the light that now filled the room. As the sun climbed higher, casting a fierce glare across the desert, the tension in the command center reached a fever pitch. The aerial drone feed displayed on the main screen showed Voss's team weaving through the jagged terrain, their figures occasionally obscured by the undulating heat waves rising off the sand. Varro stood, his posture rigid, watching every move relayed by the drone cameras. The sharp scent of electronic burning mixed with the stale air conditioning, creating a metallic taste that lingered unpleasantly on the tongue. "Enemy recon is adjusting their course. They're mirroring our movements," Harrow announced, his voice cutting through the low murmur of the command center. His fingers danced over the controls, enhancing the live feed to track both Voss's team and the pursuing enemy. "Deploy the decoys now. Let's give Voss that window he needs," Varro commanded, his voice resonant and decisive. As he spoke, a technician initiated the sequence, and small robotic decoys, carried by the team for just such a purpose, rolled out onto the sandy floor of the desert, each moving away in divergent patterns to create confusion. On the screen, the enemy paused, their movements hesitant as they encountered the decoys. The visual on the monitor split, showing both the confused enemy and Voss's team accelerating their pace towards the secondary extraction point. Varro's eyes flicked between the two images, his mind calculating every possible outcome. The low buzz of whispered updates and the soft tapping of keys provided a steady backdrop to the high-stakes drama unfolding before them. Outside, the day grew hotter, the sun a relentless overseer. Inside, the cool air was a necessary reprieve, though it did little to chill the heat of the moment. Varro could feel a bead of sweat trace a slow path down his spine, an irritating distraction from the critical decisions at hand. "Sir, Voss's team is clear of the immediate threat. They should make the extraction point in 10 minutes, Harrow reported, relief threading through his tone. "Good. Notify the extraction units to be ready to move on my mark," Varro responded, allowing himself a brief moment to close his eyes, the darkness behind his lids a short respite from the relentless visual and mental strain. Just as he reopened his eyes, another technician called out, "Signal intercept from the enemy command. They're deploying aerial surveillance to the last known location of the decoys." Varro's jaw tightened. "Scramble our countermeasures. I don't want that aerial unit giving them any advantage." The room surged into action, the energy palpable as signals were jammed and false coordinates transmitted, ensuring the enemy's efforts would lead them further astray. As each member of his team performed their role with precision, Varro felt a surge of grim satisfaction. They were a well-oiled machine, each cog turning smoothly to outmaneuver the enemy. Yet, even as they edged toward success, Varro remained acutely aware of the precarious nature of their advantage. The enemy was relentless, and every victory was temporary in the grand chessboard of war. As the situation evolved with each passing second, the mystery of their next challenge loomed, as unpredictable as the desert wind. As the false coordinates sowed confusion among the enemy ranks, Varro watched intently from the command center, his eyes tracing the blips that represented Voss's team inching closer to safety. The room smelled faintly of ozone from the overworked electronics, a stark reminder of the high-tech warfare playing out beyond the walls. "Sir, extraction units are in position, awaiting your signal," Harrow whispered, his voice a calm contrast to the underlying urgency of their mission. Varro nodded once, sharply. "On my mark," he said, poised over the communications console. His hand was steady, betraying none of the tension that knotted his stomach. Outside, the relentless sun began its descent, casting long shadows over the dunes and creating a game of light and dark that mirrored the deceptive maneuvers of war. The distant rumble of aircraft, too far to pose a threat yet, reminded them of the ever-present danger. "Mark!" Varro finally declared. The room leaped into action, the quiet tension breaking like a dam under pressure. Commands flew, crisp and concise, as the extraction began. Meanwhile, the sun dipped below the horizon, pulling darkness over the desert like a shroud. The evening chill started to creep in, a sharp contrast to the day's heat, brushing the command center with whispers of cold. The screen showed Voss's team making their final dash as shadows grew deeper, making it harder for enemy eyes to follow. The visuals from the drones displayed a ballet of evasion and pursuit, the team's movements now almost ghostly as they blended into the dusk. "Enemy response teams have been redirected by our decoys, buying us more time," a technician reported, relief threading his voice but his eyes still glued to the monitors, knowing the situation could reverse at any second. Varro's response was a tight nod. He allowed himself a brief moment to watch the horizon swallow the last light of day, the beauty of the sunset, an ironic backdrop to the tension that gripped his heart. His ears were filled with the low buzz of the command center's activity, each sound a note in the symphony of their orchestrated chaos. Suddenly, a new blip appeared on the radar, its course erratic. "Unidentified aircraft inbound. Trajectory suggests it's heading for the extraction zone," the radar operator announced, his voice tense. "Can we identify it?" Varro asked, his voice steady but his mind racing with possibilities. "We're trying, sir. It's avoiding our usual scanning frequencies," the operator replied, fingers flying over his console, trying to crack the mystery of the incoming threat. Varro turned back to the window, the night now complete and the desert a vast expanse of darkness before him. The cold from the glass seeped into his skin, a chilling reminder of the stakes at play. He felt the weight of every decision, each one a thread in the intricate tapestry of war they wove. As the command center held its breath, waiting for the radar's verdict, Varro remained a pillar of calm in the storm. His team looked to him, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. The mystery of the approaching aircraft hung over them, a silent threat that was as menacing as any enemy they had faced. In the heavy cloak of nightfall, the command center buzzed with an intensified vigilance. The unidentified aircraft continued its enigmatic approach, its intentions shrouded in darkness as thick as the desert night itself. Varro stood firm, his figure a steadfast silhouette against the backdrop of flickering screens. "Enhance the infrared. Let's see if we can get a better visual," Varro commanded, his voice echoing slightly in the tense room. A technician adjusted the controls, and the screen shifted, the incoming aircraft now highlighted against the cooler background of the barren landscape. Outside, the desert air was crisp, the biting chill a stark contrast to the day's scorching heat. The faint smell of burning oil wafted in from somewhere outside, perhaps a remnant of a distant skirmish or the usual mechanical wear of their own aging equipment. "We have visual confirmation. It's a stealth drone, sir, not one of ours," the technician reported, his tone laced with a mix of anxiety and focus. Varro's gaze hardened at the revelation. "Possible enemy surveillance. Prepare the ECMs. Let's not give them anything," he replied, referring to the electronic countermeasures ready to scramble any unauthorized probing. The rustle of movement filled the command center as personnel adjusted their stations, the air now thick with the metallic tang of electronic anticipation. Varro's nostrils flared slightly at the scent, his senses fully alert to every shift in the charged atmosphere. "ECMs online in 3, 2, 1. Harrow counted down quietly, and with a subtle nod from Varro, activated the countermeasures. On the screen, the drone's signal flickered, distorted by their interference. Its path altered slightly, a clear sign it was now blind and disoriented. However, the victory was minor, the mystery of its origin and purpose still looming large like the shadows that stretched long and deep across the desert floor. The drone, robbed of its mission, turned away, retreating back into the night from whence it came. Varro watched it go, his mind racing through potential implications. "Keep tracking that drone until it's out of our operational range. I want to know where it thinks it's going," he ordered, turning to face his team, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Yes, sir," came the immediate response, the operator's fingers resuming their dance across the consoles, tracking the retreating blip on the radar. Varro stepped away from the console, walking over to the large windows that looked out over the expanse of their temporary domain. The desert, a vast sea of sand and rock under the moonlight, seemed deceptively peaceful, untouched by the high-stakes dramas unfolding within its embrace. As the night wore on, the chill deepened, creeping through the cracks of the command center, uninvited, but relentless. Varro folded his arms, the fabric of his uniform shifting with the movement, a soft whisper in the quiet. Every now and then, his eyes flickered back to the radar screen, watching as the drone's signal grew fainter, its secrets carried away into the darkness. The mystery of its arrival had injected a fresh dose of caution into their operations, a reminder that the enemy was always watching, always waiting. As he pondered their next move, Varro felt the weight of command heavier than ever, each decision a delicate balance between action and foresight. As the drone signal disappeared into the distance, the shadows of the night seemed to deepen, a silent witness to the uncertainty that had briefly stirred within the command center. Varro turned back from the window, his gaze lingering on the horizon, where the cold moonlight painted the desert in hues of silver and gray. "Keep everyone on high alert," Varro ordered, his voice a calm yet potent force in the quiet room. "The enemy's use of a stealth drone indicates a shift in their tactics. We need to be prepared for anything." Outside, the night air was crisp, carrying the subtle notes of the desert's nocturnal life, a distant howl of a predator, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, and the occasional gust of wind that stirred the sand into ghostly swirls. These natural sounds, usually a backdrop to the evening's stillness, now seemed like a cryptic prelude to more ominous events. Inside, the command center was a hive of controlled activity. Harrow moved between stations, quietly conferring with the technicians. The scent of coffee brewed during the long night hours mingled with a faint hint of electrical insulation, a constant reminder of the technology at their fingertips. "Sir, our long-range scanners have picked up a slight anomaly in Sector 4, one of the operators suddenly announced, breaking the steady rhythm of monitoring and reports. His tone was measured, but the underlying note of concern was clear. Varro approached the station, his presence commanding yet reassuring. "Show me," he said simply, leaning over to view the data on the operator's screen. The image was grainy, the anomaly barely discernible against the static background of the desert landscape. "It could be nothing. A sensor glitch, perhaps," the operator suggested, adjusting the settings to enhance the image. "Or it could be something we can't afford to ignore," Varro countered, his eyes sharp as they studied the fluctuating data. "Recalibrate the sensors and run a full diagnostic. I want a clear reading on what we're dealing with." As the operator worked, Varro's thoughts wandered to the complexities of their situation. Each decision branched into myriad possibilities, each choice a thread in the intricate web of warfare they navigated. The rest of the night passed with a palpable tension. The command center, usually a beacon of light and noise, seemed subdued under the weight of anticipation. Each member of Varro's team was acutely aware of the stakes, their senses heightened to every beep and buzz of the equipment. When dawn finally broke, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange, it brought a slight relief from the night's oppressive uncertainty. Varro stood once again at the window, watching the day begin. The desert, so stark and beautiful in its arid solitude, offered no clues to the mysteries concealed beneath its surface. "Sir, diagnostics are clear, and the anomaly remains consistent on scans," the operator reported, his voice interrupting Varro's contemplations. "Prepare a recon team. We're going to find out exactly what's out there," Varro decided, his decision final, echoing with the resolve that had defined his leadership. As the team readied for the new mission, the mystery of the anomaly loomed large, like the desert itself, vast, enigmatic, and full of hidden depths. The challenge was clear, and as the sun climbed higher, so did their determination to uncover whatever secrets lay buried beneath the shifting sands. The early morning hours at the command center brought a lingering tension that clung to the air like the cold desert mist outside. Commander Varro, his figure rigid against the backdrop of softly whirring consoles, reviewed the sensor data with an analytical eye. The anomaly detected on the scanners was more than a blip now. It had formed into a consistent signature that neither he nor his team could afford to ignore. "Enhance the satellite imagery over that sector," Varro commanded, his voice echoing slightly in the subdued atmosphere of the room. The operator complied, fingers moving deftly over the controls, bringing the desert landscape into sharper focus on the main screen. The room darkened momentarily as the image zoomed in on a secluded valley where the anomaly had been pinpointed. Shadows danced across the digital terrain cast by the early light that spilled over the sandstone ridges. The scent of morning coffee permeated the space, mixing with the less pleasant but familiar odor of overheating electronics. "Nothing visible on the surface," murmured Harrow, standing beside Varro, his eyes squinting at the screen. "It could be underground or camouflaged," Varro interjected, his gaze not wavering from the screen. "Prepare a ground team for reconnaissance. I want eyes on the ground before noon." Harrow nodded and turned to coordinate the deployment, his movements precise and fluid, a subtle but firm presence in the bustling room. As the preparations for the recon mission commenced, Varro stepped aside, his eyes momentarily closing as he inhaled the sharp, crisp air that filtered in from the desert. The faint sounds of the command center, the low buzz of conversation, and the occasional clink of equipment being prepared for the mission created a backdrop of constant activity. Opening his eyes, Varro returned his attention to the screens, where thermal imaging was now attempting to penetrate the mystery of the anomaly. Warm hues overlaid the cold digital map, colors swirling into patterns that suggested depth and complexity beneath the unyielding surface. "Thermal scans suggest some sort of cavity or structure," the technician reported, adjusting the parameters to get a clearer image. "It's well hidden, whatever it is." Varro's mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. An enemy bunker, an undiscovered natural phenomenon, or something else entirely, something they hadn't yet considered. "Keep scanning. Anything changes, I want to know immediately," Varro stated, then turned to oversee the final preparations of the recon team. The soldiers were checking their gear, their faces set with the calm determination that came from extensive training and too many encounters with the unknown. As the team assembled outside, the desert greeted them with a blast of hot, dry air, the sun climbing higher and casting glaring light that bounced off the sand, creating a blinding haze. Varro watched them depart, the roar of the transport vehicles kicking up clouds of dust that momentarily obscured their path. Left in the silence that followed their departure, Varro felt the weight of command press down on him, the desert's vastness echoing the enormity of the unknown they were about to confront. The mystery that lay hidden in the sands was a puzzle, its pieces scattered and obscured, waiting for the keen eyes of his team to uncover and assemble them into a coherent whole. As the recon team's vehicles disappeared into the horizon, kicking up whirls of dust that sparkled in the morning sun, Commander Varro returned to the dim calm of the command center. Each monitor flickered with data, casting a soft glow that illuminated the intense concentration on the faces of his team. "Set up a direct feed from the recon team's visuals," Varro instructed, his voice resonant yet measured to maintain the focused atmosphere. The technicians worked swiftly, establishing a live link that brought the desolate beauty of the desert right into the room. The screen showed the rugged terrain, the undulating hills casting long, dark shadows that seemed to hide secrets. Outside, the sun beat down mercilessly, the heat a tangible weight that seemed to press down on the landscape. Inside, the cool air of the command center was a stark contrast, filled with the scent of recycled air and a hint of antiseptic cleanliness that spoke of a space long closed off from the natural world. "We have visual on the target area," one of the recon team members reported, his voice crackling through the speakers. The camera panned over a section of land that looked unremarkable to the untrained eye, yet the thermal scans had indicated otherwise. Varro leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Begin the surface scan. Look for any anomalies, anything that doesn't match the surrounding area," he commanded. The team on the ground adjusted their equipment, the screen briefly flickering as the thermal overlay came online. The room fell silent, the only sounds the soft click of keyboards and the low murmur of whispered confirmations. The thermal imaging revealed subtle variations in the landscape, patches that retained heat differently than their surroundings. "See that? That area's holding heat. Unnatural for shadowed sand," pointed out a technician, his finger tapping against the screen. Varro nodded. "Focus on that zone. Start the ground-penetrating radar. Let's see what's hidden beneath." The recon team deployed the radar, a high-tech device that was usually reserved for uncovering deeply buried structures. The anticipation in the command center grew as the radar data began to feed through. The graphical display shifted, lines and colors mapping the subterranean world in real time. "There!" An underground structure, possibly metallic, the lead technician announced, her voice a mix of excitement and professional triumph. The screen displayed an outline of something large, its structure complex and clearly artificial. Varro straightened, a surge of adrenaline sharpening his senses. "Prepare for a closer examination. I want eyes and ears on that structure. If it's what I think it is, it could change the balance of power in this region." As the team coordinated the next phase, Varro's mind raced through various scenarios. Each step had to be calculated with precision. There was no room for error. The strategic implications of their find were enormous, potentially exposing enemy operations or uncovering new resources. "Send in the probe. I need visuals inside that structure," he ordered, his voice now a commanding echo in the charged atmosphere. The probe, a small, unmanned device equipped with cameras and sensors, made its way into the underground facility. As its lights pierced the darkness, revealing the contours of a long-forgotten installation, every breath in the command center was held, every eye fixed on the screens. The mystery of what lay beneath the desert was unfolding, and with it, the potential to steer future strategies not just for the war, but for the stability of the region. As the probe's lights cut through the subterranean darkness, revealing the contours of the hidden installation, a collective murmur filled the command center. The images transmitted back were clearer now, the angular geometry of man-made structures and the reflective surfaces of metallic objects, untouched by time. "Looks like a storage facility, but for what?" Harrow murmured, leaning closer to the monitor. Varro's gaze was fixed, analytical. "Let's find out. Extend the probe's sensor range. I want a full chemical and radiological report." The technician nodded, adjusting the controls. The probe moved slowly, its cameras panning over large crates stamped with indecipherable markings. A soft whir of its mechanisms was the only sound in an otherwise silent operation as it extended its arm to initiate a scan. Outside, the desert sun cast a brilliant sheen over the sands, making the barren landscape almost blinding. Inside, the cool dimness of the command center provided a stark contrast, with screens casting a pale light on the faces of the crew, each member absorbed in their tasks. The probe's sensors beeped softly as it completed its analysis, the data streaming in real time back to the command center. "No radiation hazards," the technician reported, relief in his voice. "But there's a complex cocktail of chemicals here. Some are definitely propellants or explosives." Varro's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "An arms cache, perhaps hidden from satellite surveillance," he speculated, turning to Harrow. "This could be what the enemy was protecting with that stealth drone." The implications were clear. They had stumbled upon a significant strategic asset, potentially pivotal in the ongoing conflict. "Secure the site. I want the explosives unit ready to move out within the hour," Varro ordered decisively. Harrow was already on the communicator, issuing instructions. The urgency of the situation had injected a new vitality into the room, the team moving with renewed purpose. "We should also consider the political ramifications," Varro added, speaking more to himself now. "This find could give us leverage in the peace negotiations." As preparations for the deployment were underway, Varro walked to the back of the command center, where a large map hung on the wall. It detailed the region's topography and known military assets. His finger traced potential routes to the newly discovered site, calculating the safest approach. The room hummed with activity, each member of the team contributing to the operation's next phase. The air was thick with the scent of ozone from the electronic equipment, blending with the faint odor of coffee and the sharper tang of printer ink as mission briefs were printed and distributed. Varro returned to the main console just as the first images of the chemical analysis completed downloading. The detailed reports confirmed his suspicions. They had indeed found an enemy arsenal, possibly intended for a major offensive. "Good work, everyone," Varro announced, his voice resonant in the busy room. "This discovery not only shifts the battlefield, it might just help us end the war." As the team rallied around this new objective, the sense of a turning tide was palpable. Each member felt the weight of their discovery, knowing that their actions in the coming hours could indeed shape the course of history. In the dance of war and diplomacy, they had just gained a significant upper hand. As the dust settled on the newly uncovered arsenal, the strategic implications of the find resonated through the ranks of Varro's command. The team worked tirelessly, securing the site and documenting the hoard of munitions that could alter the course of the conflict. The command center buzzed with a cautious optimism, underpinned by the gravity of their discovery. Varro stood at the forefront, his presence as commanding as the dawn that broke over the desert, casting long shadows and illuminating possibilities previously shrouded in the darkness of uncertainty. "This changes everything," he declared, his voice echoing around the room, capturing the essence of their breakthrough. "Not only do we hold the key to crippling their operational capabilities, but we also control the narrative now." Harrow stepped forward, handing Varro a communication link. "It's time to let the world know, sir. Your words could dictate the next steps toward peace or prolonged conflict." Taking the transmitter, Varro paused, the weight of his next actions palpable in the charged atmosphere. He cleared his throat, and his words rolled out, strong and deliberate. "To all units and command posts, this is Commander Varro. We have secured an enemy arsenal significant enough to alter the strategic landscape of this region. This victory is not just a testament to our perseverance, but also a beacon of hope for peace." As his speech transmitted across waves, reaching friends and foes alike, the personnel in the room stood a little taller, driven by the profound impact of their efforts. "Prepare to move out," Varro continued, turning to address his team directly. "We'll escort these weapons back to base. I want tight security. Nothing is left to chance." The convoy preparation was meticulous, with each vehicle and soldier ready to play their part in a carefully choreographed withdrawal from the site. The engines roared to life, a deep, resounding rumble that shook the ground, as potent as the resolve that fueled them. The journey back was tense, every soldier alert to potential threats. Yet, as they approached their base, the sight that greeted them was unexpected. Gathered were not only their fellow soldiers, but also delegates from the opposing forces under a white banner of truce, their presence a direct response to Varro's broadcast. Stepping out of the lead vehicle, Varro approached the assembly, his steps measured, his mind racing with diplomatic strategies. "We stand at a crossroads," he began, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Today, we have the power not only to end lives but to spare them, to not only seize territory, but to grant peace. Let this arsenal not be a tool of war, but a catalyst for peace." The delegates exchanged looks, the impact of Varro's words undeniable. Murmurs of agreement began to ripple through the crowd, the first threads of dialogue weaving through the air, stitching together a tentative tapestry of truce. As the sun set, casting the desert in hues of gold and amber, Varro watched the unfolding negotiations, a sense of accomplishment mingling with cautious hope. His gaze turned toward his troops, their faces etched with fatigue and pride. Today, we did more than capture weapons. We captured the chance to change the course of history, he whispered to Harrow, who nodded in solemn agreement. In the shadows of their success, the story of how they saved more than just a future queen but potentially countless lives began to take shape, resonating deeply with the ethos of humanity. Fuck yeah. Here, on the sands that had witnessed uncounted strife, stood a man who had turned the tide, not just of battle, but of war itself. As the twilight deepened over the newly peaceful assembly, Commander Varro stood with dignitaries from both sides of the conflict, their shadows merging on the sand like the reconciling sentiments they now shared. The air was thick with the desert's evening chill, but the atmosphere among the delegates was warm, heated by the potential of what had been started here today. This cache, Varro gestured to the secured arsenal behind him, was meant to be used to continue a war that has drained both our peoples. Instead, let it be the cornerstone of the peace we build together. A delegate from the opposing forces, a seasoned diplomat named Mirek, stepped forward, his face marked by lines of hardship and hope. Commander Varro, today you have shown us not only the might of your forces, but the strength of your honor. We are ready to discuss terms of peace, to end this long suffering. Varro nodded solemnly, his eyes reflecting the last light of the sun. Then let's begin, not with what divides us, but with what unites us. The desire for peace, for prosperity, and for a future where our children can live without fear. The talks that ensued stretched into the evening, lit by the soft glow of campfires around the negotiating area. Each point discussed was a step away from conflict, each agreement a bridge towards a lasting truce. Varro, standing slightly apart, watched the proceedings with a vigilant but hopeful gaze. As the fire crackled, the sound mingling with the voices of negotiation, Harrow approached Varro, handing him a satellite communication device. "Sir, the High Command is online, awaiting your report." Varro took the device, stepping away from the firelight into the cooler shadows. "This is Varro," he began, his voice steady. "The operation was a success. But more importantly, the opportunity it has created for peace is the real victory. We are negotiating terms now." The response was brief, a crackle of voices over the line, then clear. "Confirmed, Commander. Excellent work. Keep us updated. Peace is the priority." As Varro returned to the circle, the desert around them seemed to hold its breath, the stars overhead shining like beacons of hope. The delegates were signing a preliminary agreement, their earlier animosity replaced by a cautious camaraderie. The night grew deeper, and as the final delegate signed, spontaneous applause broke out among the soldiers watching on. Varro felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not just for the strategic success, but for steering a potential massacre into a meaningful dialogue. "Today we chose a different kind of bravery," Varro addressed his troops and the delegates. "Today we fought not against, but for something, peace, and that is the true strength of humanity." The delegates and troops alike stood in a moment of silent acknowledgement, the weight of Varro's words settling over them. As the meeting dispersed, Varro stood looking out across the desert, the stars reflecting in his eyes. He had not only saved a future queen, but had perhaps redirected the future of an entire region. In this quiet moment under the vast, unending sky, Commander Elian Varro knew the real battle lay ahead, the battle to uphold the peace they had forged on these sands, a testament to the enduring spirit and ingenuity of humanity.